watching The Last Word with me, Maria Shakil. Pan-India NIA raids across 6 states and 53 cities, targeting the web of Khalistan-supporting gangsters. This was the 7th in a series of crackdowns. The focus today was on snapping weapons supply and terror financing links. On Saturday, the NIA seized Khalistan-terrorist Gurpat Panu's property in 2 cities. Clearly, the aim is to wipe out terror funding right from its roots. So while all the Trudeau government has managed to do is make allegations, India is moving full steam ahead on its intent to dismantle Khalistan-linked terror networks that are spread across Canada, Pakistan, Portugal, Australia, and many other countries. On the show tonight, we decode the Khalistan files. We have a very special guest joining us straight from Vancouver, Kashid. He is a Richmond City Councillor and former Solicitor General of British Columbia. Also, the first Indo-Canadian police chief. But first up, details on the NIA raids today.
Six states, 3 cases, 53 locations. Mega crackdown by NIA on Khalistani terror and gangster links. Punjab, Uttarakhand, Rajasthan, Haryana, Delhi, Uttar Pradesh and the Union Territory of Chandigarh. NIA teams spanned across to zero in on aides of gangster Lawrence Bishnoi and wanted Khalistani-terrorist Arshdeep Dalla. Arshdeep Dalla is known to run an extortion racket in Canada. Besides Arsh Dalla, others under the NIA scanner in these raids were notorious gangsters Lawrence Bishnoi, Sukha Duneke, Harry Moore, Narendra alias Lali, Kala Jatheri and Deepak Tinnu.
Why these raids are happening, we have been reporting for a while that how Government of India has found and established links between the gangsters and extremists who are based in Canada, who are backed by Pakistan, and an NIA charge sheet which came to the light yesterday, it was found that in the probe, the NIA found that how these gangsters based in Canada have multiple roles or engage in multiple activities.
NIA is primarily looking at tracing funds flowing to Canada as well as other countries like Pakistan, UAE and Portugal, where the gangs are running an extortion racket enticing Punjabi youth to engage in terror activities and targeted killings. Pistols, ammunition, digital devices and other incriminating material have been seized. NIA investigations have revealed that the conspiracies under investigation were being hatched in jails of different states. The sensational killing of Maharashtra builder Sanjay Biyani, mining trader Mehal Singh and international kabaddi player Sandeep Nangal Ambiya in Punjab last year are some such crimes that made the headlines. NIA had earlier conducted similar raids at over 370 locations. 38 arms including 4 lethal weapons and over 1,000 rounds of ammunition were seized. NIA has so far frozen 87 bank accounts and attached 13 properties. 2 absconders have been declared as designated individual terrorists. 15 accused have been declared as proclaimed offenders. And red corner notices have been issued against 9 others. The Goldie Brar Lawrence Bishnoi gang, allegedly part of a K-terror nexus, is also connected to several big targets, like the recent killing of notorious Khalistani Sukha Duneke in Canada, as well as the shooting of singer Sidhu Moosewala last year. Bishnoi also threatened Bollywood superstar Salman Khan in 2022. With Mohammad Ghazali and Neeta Sharma, Bureau Report, NDTV.
And let me go straight to Vancouver, where Kashid, Richmond City Councillor, also former Minister of Public Safety and Solicitor General of British Columbia, is joining me live. Mr. Heed, really appreciate your time and thank you for speaking to NDTV. In your experience as a cop, how widespread is the web of what India calls as Khalistani terror in Canada?
Well, there's been terror, there's been organized crime groups that have been operating throughout the world, and especially here in Canada. We've identified several of them going back several decades. We continue to deal with the onslaught of gun violence, murders, killings, extortions. All of what you've reported in India is occurring on our Canadian soil here. So it's been a long-standing issue. It's prevalent in society. It's prevalent with various ethnic groups, not necessarily just with the South Asians here in Canada, but there's a lot of other ethnic groups and mainstream groups that are involved in this type of activity. So, like I say, it's prevalent whether you want to identify it as a Khalistani group, whether you want to identify it as a other Asian-based organized crime group, is quite prevalent in Canada, and they're making a lot of money, and it's mainly because of the sale of drugs and weapons.
Okay, let me go straight to this entire Niger killing, and because there are media reports that the investigations into Niger's killing was botched up from the word go. Where do you think the investigators went wrong?
Well, let me tell you, I don't think the investigators are doing anything wrong. I think the investigators are doing what they need to be doing. I think our politicians are speaking out of line, and I think that's caused a lot of confusion internationally as to what has taken place. The investigators are investigating this with some other intricacies as a normal homicide, and we're used to doing these types of investigation because it's been so, as I mentioned, prevalent here in British Columbia, especially in the region that we're talking about, Surrey. So they're doing their job. They're trying to put together the case that has sufficient evidence, hopefully, to lead to charges against individuals. But when we have this political, what I call political interference that's taking place, where you've got politicians grandstanding on an issue, which not necessarily will be true, or the evidence will lead in that direction, is the complicating matter that we're facing right now.
And since you talk about political interference and political grandstanding, India has been asking for evidence. India has been talking about specifics and seeking evidence. But what is really stopping Canada from providing evidence after what Justin Trudeau claimed on the floor of the House? They have to provide evidence to back their claims.
You have to question what that evidence is. Whether it is substantial evidence that can lead to accusations that are being made by the head of our state, the Prime Minister of Canada, or whether it's just intelligence, rhetoric, information that comes in. When you're dealing with these types of high-profile killings, you get a lot of information that comes in. That's not necessarily true. You've got conspiracy theories that are developed. You've got those that need to be looked at. You've got significant evidence that you're dealing with. You need to take an inductive approach here and let the evidence lead to whatever the accusations or charges could be. And if others are involved through some type of conspiracy, let's look at that. But this is in its infancy stages of the investigation, and we need to let these police officers do their job. We don't need that political rhetoric taking place within our systems.
And Indian External Affairs Minister has said, and I'm quoting him, Mr. Heed, in the last few years, Canada has actually seen a lot of organized crime relating to secessionist forces. As you talked about, organized crime, violence and extremism are all very, very deeply mixed up. In fact, India has been talking about specifics and information. We have been badgering Canada about organized crime and terrorist leaders who have been identified. If you have to understand what is going on there, you have to factor in the environment. And India has been raising these concerns. Do you think this has to move away from the political space? Because there is a lot of, one sense is that there is a political calculus which is at play in Canada. And that is the reason why Justin Trudeau has taken that position rather than going into specifics.
You're actually very accurate with respect to that. We have been raising the issue of groups that have been involved in it to make money, whether it's for illicit activities such as terrorism or things like that throughout Canada. You have to remember, given the political situation we're in right now, we have a governing party of Canada that's in a crisis right now. Whether it's having to deal with this situation, which they went out, in my opinion, ahead of time on without the clear facts, or whether they're dealing with the Speaker of the House that has to resign because of what he says and recognizes people that fought for the Nazis. He's in turmoil right now. He's looking for some type of out. This is not the out that he should be utilizing, trying to bring back his political credibility, because what has happened now, that political credibility is weaning at a very rapid pace.
My last question to you, and before I let you go, India today has conducted 7th raid in the series of crackdown. Dossiers have been shared by the Indian government in the past, talking about the Khalistani terrorists who have taken shelter in Canada. My question is, what has the government of Canada done till now?
Well, I have to question that too, because it's been relatively quiet. There has been no significant information that people have talked about with regard to this. So if you're ignoring the fact that this is now taking place on our sovereign soil, and now all of a sudden you're bringing it out for your own political gain, that's very, very questionable. But I believe these types of activities have been taking place in Canada, again, if it relates to this issue or other issues, and it's not comprehensively dealt with by our political systems, our policymakers, and the police officers out there are trying to do the best they can, but they're guided by policymakers, they're guided by these politicians. So it's somewhat problematic to me. I think we've got to have some clear delineation between the political system and the law enforcement system. We have a charter in Canada, we have the law of the land. We need to follow that law.
My last question, because you're making some very, very important points here. The minority Trudeau government, is supported by the New Democratic Party of Khalistan, which is supported by Jagmeet Singh. Do you think that is the reason for the kind of political calculations that he is doing? And he understands fully well that how important they are in his scheme of things in Canada. So this is more of a domestic political calculation.
I believe it is a domestic political calculation. I believe it is the wrong calculation, because at the end of the day, you're not going to be able to pull the wool over the elector in Canada. As a matter of fact, I think this Prime Minister, his party is in significant trouble right now, but you cannot use a very serious crime like this to try and get out of your political mud that you're in right now. So I have total disdain for politicians, and I was a politician and still am a politician, but I have total disdain for politicians that are using the death of someone for their own benefit.
That's a strong statement coming from you, Kashid. Really appreciate your time. Thank you so much. Let me bring in my guests. Joining us from Geneva, Dr. Zachary Paikin. He is non-resident research fellow, Institute for Peace and Diplomacy. We have Professor Abrams, international security expert, and he is also author of books on terrorist dynamics. Joining me from Boston, we have Bharat Karnad, national security expert, also Puneet Sahani, expert on Khalistani terrorism, joining me from New York. Dr. Paikin, I'm going to begin with you. Those were some very straight talk that came from Kashid, who is privy to a lot of details, also as a police chief in the past and now as a city councillor. Where do you think this entire investigation is headed? Until and unless credible evidence is provided, then it will be seen as just some kind of escapism on part of Justin Trudeau.
Well, I don't think that anyone can predict where this thing is headed right now. I think we have seen just recently the Indian foreign minister, perhaps tone down the tone a little bit, and basically say that he's open to reviewing evidence that may come his way. I think that's a good sign. Obviously, irrespective of how the investigation turns out, this is an unfortunate bilateral rift in the relationship between Canada and India, and it's something that both sides should do well to resolve. It's in their mutual interest to do so, and I hope that we'll see statesmanship on both sides to that effect.
Talking specifically about Indian officials, what they are insisting, they are saying that Trudeau's allegation is politically motivated and that has been done with an eye on the Sikh diaspora in Canada, and that the US, Canada's and other Five Eyes and G7 alliance partners have been dragged into this.
Well, again, a lot depends on the actual veracity of the claims, which remains to be ascertained. But indeed, there's no question that a huge proportion of Canada's foreign policy is unfortunately domestically oriented, whether towards different ethnocultural group interests and narratives, or towards broader Canadian ideological political narratives from the left and from the right. It's an unfortunate tendency. It means effectively that we're talking more to ourselves than we're talking to the rest of the world. That's just a shortcoming of Canadian foreign policy in general. But what we're learning is that, we historically were able to get away with that because we were living in a unipolar world. We were geographically isolated, and we could afford to have this foreign policy discourse that made ourselves feel good about ourselves, and that pandered to various, groups for electoral purposes. But I think we're realizing now, as the world becomes more multipolar, that these sorts of discourses and this sort of foreign policy, which we thought was innocuous, it's not, malicious in any, in any respect, comes with major consequences for our international relationships with rising powers, with major powers, including India.
Yes, Bharat Karnad, let's look at the NIA raids that have been conducted. Pan-India, multiple locations, multiple cities. India is sending a message here that they are serious about investigation, that the charge sheet which was filed talked about the syndicate members who have fled India and are operating from foreign countries. They are carrying out targeted killings, extortions, and terrorist activities.
Well, look, I think the question does arise as to if all these processes of investigation and people being charged and being apprehended and so on and so forth, why didn't we do it earlier? Meaning, did we have to wait for Justin Trudeau to provoke us into doing these things publicly? The flip side of that is that you've had this internal security problem in Punjab for a long time. This nexus between gangsters and terrorists and drug runners and gun runners and all kinds of, the netherworld people. And this is now centrally a part of the Canadian landscape, because they're all mixed in with what I call the Gurdwara business in Canada. There are all these Gurdwaras that they are fighting over, these guys, these outlaws, just so that, they begin to manage the monies. And it's a way to launder their funds. It's all kinds of things happening. And, to me, it is surprising that the government of India waited this long to get these kinds of police and legal processes underway. Because obviously, the NIA had all the information. They could have moved earlier, and they didn't.
Okay,
the point I'm trying to make
then tell me why do you think the NIA did not move earlier? But what happened today, Bharat Karnad, was in the series of raids that have been conducted. The NIA charge sheet has been put out as well. There were several raids that have happened in the past. In the last few weeks, we have seen that movement of confiscating property as well, the seizing that has happened of Panu's property, for example.
Well, yes, but you see, this past week, that's what I'm trying to say, has the trigger been Justin Trudeau's provoking us into doing it?
Yes.
Or were we going to do it anyway, and we're taking our own time? It's a good thing that we are now fast spacing it and getting up to speed, as it were, so that we can now confront Ottawa and anybody else amongst the so-called Five Eyes powers who want any kind of evidence. Because we have whole fat dossiers on whole bunches of people that the Canadian government has harbored by giving them entry permits and so on the most spurious kinds of reasons, like sponsorships by these very gangsters already settled and ensconced in Canada. So you have real problem.
Okay, just put this in context for us. Professor Abrams, what kind of response has India got from Canada and other countries? Because the web has been spread across multiple countries. There is UAE, there is Portugal, multiple other countries, and all of them have been taking shelter there. So what is the response that India has got so far from these countries when it has talked about the conspiracies and how there are linkages, that what is being done there by the handlers, and they have people here in jails who are then reaching out to others outside and implementing it? Carrying out the crime.
Yeah, sure. This story really seems not to be dying down. I mean, the situation seems to be expanding, if anything. Initially, this guy was killed, and that in June, and then more recently, Canada pinned the blame on Indian officials. I thought that maybe this was going to be a one-off incident. I thought maybe it could be contained on a bilateral level between India and Canada. but more and more, I think there's going to be pressure on the United States to, come out one way or another, because we've been told that a major ally who's a Five Eye partner was involved in the data collection. Most likely, that's the United States. There is going to be an investigation. The rubber will hit the road at some point. And then more recently, just over the past day or so, it turns out that Indian authorities are waging what seems like a serious crackdown against pro-Khalistani groups and resources, as well as gangsters, and that the diaspora community of concern isn't limited to Canada. It's not limited to the United States, but it expands into the UAE, and now I'm hearing Portugal, etc. So it does seem that the Modi government is very serious about opposing this pro-Khalistani extremist movement, and there seem to be many moving parts all over the world. And this is concerning for those who worry about Khalistani extremism, but also geopolitical amity.
But Professor Abram, the reaction or the response from most of these countries is not what the government of India had expected, in the sense that they view them very differently. And that's the reason why they have, taken shelter here. Dalla, Gaurav Patial are all based abroad, but they stay in touch with Khalistani-terrorists to secure funding, smuggle weapons and order murders. There are acts of extortion that is being done by them. They are involved in anti-national activities.
Yeah, I teach a lot of terrorism courses, and I bring up this example of Khalistanis because there's no consensus over the definition of terrorism, of course, and different countries have different views as to who the terrorists are. From the vantage of the Modi government, there's no question that we're dealing with terrorists in the diaspora. From the vantage of the Trudeau government, it seems like, he certainly doesn't view them as terrorists, and it's not even clear that he views them as political extremists. So there is this disconnect, and it makes it very difficult for India to crack down on its enemies abroad. But it also puts Trudeau in a difficult position as well, because he wants to maintain, his sovereignty, etc. And this has been a longstanding problem with respect to, the Khalistani movement, particularly based out of Canada.
Okay, I have just enough time for Puneet Sahni, and thank you so much for your patience, Puneet. As we do know that cases have been filed against Bishnoi and gangster bosses like Goldie Brar, Vikram Brar, and as well as Bambia gang members. But when it comes to proper action, what kind of response has there been from these countries where India has shared dossiers, said that, we are following the procedure, we are following the processes?
Right, Maria. So there are two sides, right? So we have a problem, and the problem is like A on the Indian side and B on the international side, right? So the Indian side, actually, a lot of the problem is our own doing. So for example, if you saw yesterday, somebody was burning the flag. He was the son of nephew of Bhindanwale, his name Bhagat Singh Barat. India removed him from the blacklist because of the hubris that we will win heart and minds, that these are criminals. And with criminals, you deal with setting an effective deterrent. You have to get this clarity first. The peace of Punjab was won at an incredible price. So, I have no problem with Mr. Modi, but I don't care he is there or anybody who is there. Nobody has the right to play gamble with the peace of Punjab. That is point number one. Now, when you talk about Canada, and we are all criticizing Trudeau and all these other things, we have to see when a country deals with terrorism, you need two things. How much do its people have the stomach to fight terrorism? And the second, does it have the institutional tools to fight terrorism? Canada has neither. I'll give you just example that will, explain everything. In 1985, when they did the greatest aviation terror in history, when they blasted 330 people mid-air, that was 1985. In 1986, the very same people, they were planning to blow the Indian Parliament. And this was caught on the wiretap. This is called Hamilton Plan, if you Google. Now, if you Google, you will find it. So the people fought it, and when it was taken to court, it was not some what Trudeau says credible evidence. It was clinching evidence. It was on wiretap that these people wanted to abduct a child of the parliamentarian and kill the child if he doesn't get entry, and if then get entry and blow up the entire parliament. And that case was thrown out of the Canadian courts because there was some technicality in obtaining the wiretap. So at that time, when Canadians knew this is such a grave threat, and the Khalistanis were basically plumbers and, doing blue-collar jobs and not infiltrated the system. At that time, they did not have the tools to deal with terrorism. And in the 40 years, everything has gone worse. Khalistanis have become stronger and infiltrated the system much more. And, they have brought no new things. And the political system is completely compromised by Khalistanis. Okay. So Canada actually, even if it wants, cannot deal with terror. What we have to do is set effective deterrent, because what's in our control, that we can control. Canada, for the foreseeable future, would be an exporter of terrorism to India.
That's a strong statement, certainly, Puneet. Thank you so much for joining us, Bharat Karnad, Professor Abrams, and Dr. Zachary Paikin. A story we'll continue to track very, very closely. Thanks so much for watching, and I'll be seeing you tomorrow.